Friends, in today's video, we bring you the emotional real-life story of a Muslim Russian female inmate. While she was locked behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, a corrupt police officer did something to her so humiliating, so cruel, it could break anyone's spirit. But this woman didn't stay silent. What she did next to fight back will truly shock you. She stood up alone against the system and gave that officer a lesson he would never forget. Want to know what she did and how she turned her pain into power? Then don't skip this video. Watch it till the very end. If her bravery touches your heart, make sure to hit the like button, drop a comment, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss another story like this. So, let's begin this unforgettable journey of courage, injustice, and the fight for dignity. In the icy shadow of a snow-covered prison on the outskirts of Kazan, Russia, the night was colder than usual. The thick gray concrete walls of the women's correctional facility held more than just inmates. They held secrets, cries, and the echoes of injustice that no one outside dared to hear. Inside, Cell 17 sat a young woman, only 27, with deep, weary eyes and a scarf loosely wrapped around her dark, unkempt hair. Her name was Amina Rustamova, a former boutique consultant in Moscow. She had once lived a modest, honest life until it was ripped away by a false accusation of embezzlement. She had tried to fight the charges, had pleaded her innocence, but her voice was drowned out by the weight of forged documents and a justice system that didn't care to listen. The real culprit? Her manager. But in court, all fingers pointed at Amina. Now, in this cold, humid cell with cracked cement walls and a rusty barred window, Amina wrapped her arms around her knees. Her prison uniform hung loosely on her body. An orange jumpsuit too big, too heavy, both literally and symbolically. 3 nights had passed since she was locked up, but every night felt like a lifetime. At exactly 11 p.m., the familiar echo of black boots striking the concrete echoed down the corridor. Amina's entire body stiffened. She knew that sound too well now. It was Sergeant Karimov, a correctional officer who always walked the halls alone after lights out. His eyes, the way they lingered on her, were never professional. Clank. The sound of his baton striking her cell door made her jump. Rustamova, he called in a slow, heavy voice. Amina stood shakily and walked to the bars. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. "You're being called for reinterrogation. Come out," he said. Amina hesitated. Who does reinterrogations at midnight? But in prison, questions were dangerous. She stepped out as the door unlocked, her breath catching in her throat. The corridor was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb. Sergeant Karimov didn't speak as he walked ahead, leading her into the far corner of the facility, where the main interrogation room sat unused after dusk. When they arrived, the room was empty. One dull ceiling light cast a ghostly yellow glow across the table and chairs. "Sit," he ordered. Amina sat stiffly, but no one else came. No questions were asked. Karimov didn't even pretend to hold a file. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning her body. "You're a beautiful girl," he said suddenly. "Why would someone like you steal?" "I didn't steal anything, sir. I was framed," Amina whispered, her voice trembling but clear. He took a step toward her. "You think you're still someone here? This is prison, sweetheart. I can make your life very hard or very easy," he said with a twisted smile. Amina stood backing away. "Don't touch me," she said sharply, raising a trembling hand in defense. But Karimov only laughed. He reached out, brushing her hair back. She slapped his hand away. "You will regret that," he hissed, grabbing her arm. Amina whimpered. Just then, clack, clack. Heavy footsteps approached the hallway outside. A voice called out, "Sergeant Karimov, you're needed at the central post. Now." Karimov cursed under his breath and let go of her arm. He stared at her like a wolf interrupted mid-hunt. "Lucky girl," he muttered, shoving her back into the chair before exiting the room. Amina collapsed onto the cold metal, her body trembling uncontrollably. She hadn't been assaulted, not tonight. But she knew now this was only the beginning. The next morning, Amina sat quietly in her cell, pale and hollow-eyed. A new inmate, a middle-aged woman named Maria, had been placed in the neighboring cell. Maria was observant and strong-willed. She noticed Amina's withdrawn posture and the faint bruises forming on her wrist. "You look like you saw a ghost," Maria whispered through the vent. Amina just shook her head. Her lips stayed sealed. But deep down she wasn't just afraid of one man. She was terrified of a system built to silence her cries, one that punished her not just for a crime she didn't commit, but for daring to resist. As the nights passed, so did the fear. Karimov returned again. Sometimes he just stood in the hallway staring at her cell. Other times he knocked softly, whispering her name like a curse. Amina slept in layers of clothing, hoping her baggy outfit would hide her shape. She pressed herself into corners, trying to become invisible. But fear has a scent, and predators always know when their prey is afraid. On the fourth night, Amina did something desperate. She wrote on the back of a torn receipt, a note, a confession, maybe a cry for help. If anyone ever reads this, know that this prison does more than cage the body. It kills the soul. "My name is Amina Rustamova. Please remember me." She slid it behind a loose brick in the wall. Her voice had been taken, but she was determined to leave behind a whisper that might one day become a scream. The days that followed blurred into a haze of silence, fear, and sleepless nights. For Amina Rustamova, each moment inside that cell felt like balancing on the edge of a knife. The only thing keeping her grounded was the quiet presence of Maria Bakirova, the older woman in the neighboring cell. Maria was no ordinary inmate. Before her conviction, she had been a well-known social activist in Chelyabinsk, advocating for women's rights and government reform. Her downfall came after she was accused of embezzling funds from her own nonprofit. Some said it was political sabotage. Others believed she simply poked the wrong bear. But inside prison, none of that mattered. One morning after the guards distributed stale bread and tea, Maria leaned closer to the wall vent between their cells and whispered, "Amina, did something happen that night?" Amina hesitated, then shaking her head, she replied softly, "It doesn't matter. No one here would care." "They will care," Maria said firmly. "You just have to give them a reason to." That afternoon, the prison was unusually quiet. Most inmates were attending a rehabilitation program in the main hall, but Amina, still mentally exhausted, stayed behind. She sat in her cell, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, staring at the cracked wall, wondering how long she could survive. Suddenly, that familiar sound returned. The slow, deliberate footsteps of Sergeant Karimov echoing down the hallway. Her blood ran cold. Her hands began to tremble. She pressed her back into the corner of the cell. "Why are you alone, little mouse?" Karimov said, his face peeking between the bars. "I didn't feel well," Amina muttered. "Well," he sneered, twirling his baton between his fingers, "maybe I can make you feel better." He pulled a set of keys from his belt. Her heart sank. Not now, not again. As he reached for the lock, a sharp voice rang out from the end of the hallway. "Sergeant Karimov, report to the command post. Now." Karimov flinched. His eyes turned dark. "You're lucky again," he growled, jamming the keys back onto his belt and storming off. Amina collapsed, sobbing. Her hands covered her face as the terror escaped her body in the form of tears. Once again she'd been spared. But how many close calls would it take before her luck ran out? That night, After roll call and lights out, something unexpected happened. As Amina lay curled on her thin mattress, a small folded note was slipped into her palm under the cover of darkness. It was from Maria. The words were written in tiny, steady script. "I have a plan, but you'll need to be strong. We need proof. I will help you." It was the first moment in weeks Amina felt something stir inside her. Hope. Over the next few days, Maria quietly put her plan into motion. She had been in the prison system long enough to know who to trust and who to avoid. One of the few people she believed in was Officer Ulana Mutazina, known as Miss Ulia among the inmates, a rare female guard with a conscience. Miss Ulia had once worked with Maria during a women's health campaign before joining the correctional system. Although she had kept her distance so far, Maria believed she still had a heart. During a routine medical escort, Maria faked a dizzy spell and requested a private moment with Miss Ulia. "There's something happening in here," Maria whispered. "One of the officers is targeting a female inmate." Miss Ulia's eyes narrowed. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I can get it. Amina's not safe. We need to do something before it's too late." Miss Ulia's silence was heavy. "If this is a setup, I lose everything. My job, my pension." "If you stay silent," Maria said, "we both lose our humanity." A day later, a smuggled voice recorder, borrowed from a sympathetic nurse, was hidden behind a loose stone near Amina's bed. Its battery was weak, its range short, but it might be enough. Amina knew what it meant. She would have to endure another visit. She would have to let it happen. Up to the edge. So the recorder could catch his voice, his threats, his true intentions. She wasn't sure where the courage came from. 2 nights later, it happened. Karamov returned, smug and relaxed, confident that everyone else was asleep. This time he unlocked the cell door. Amina didn't scream. She stood, her hands shaking at her sides, but she looked him in the eye. "You think you can keep hiding?" he whispered. "I chose you. You should be honored." His breath was thick with vodka. He stepped forward, reaching toward her. And then, a booming voice echoed from the command post. "All night staff, report to the front now." Karamov cursed loudly and bolted. But when he turned the corner, Miss Ulia was waiting, flanked by 2 senior officers. Their arms were crossed, their expressions stone cold. Behind them, Maria watched silently from a dark corner. Amina sat on the floor, knees shaking, tears pouring down. But this time, they were not tears of terror. They were the beginning of victory. Later that night, the recorder was retrieved. The evidence was passed directly into the hands of prison leadership. It was clear, damning, and specific. Karamov's voice, his threats, his laugh. But even then, Amina knew this was not the end. It was only the start of a no battle, against a system built not to believe women like her. The air inside the prison felt heavier in the days following the discovery of the audio recording. Word spread quickly among inmates. Someone had finally dared to speak up. Some looked at Amina with admiration, others with fear. Many simply avoided her, afraid that being too close to her might attract unwanted attention from the guards. But Amina didn't care. For the first time since her arrest, she had hope. Hope that someone had finally heard her. The recording of Sergeant Karimov's voice had been delivered to the prison warden, Director Valery Petro, a career officer with a reputation for keeping scandals buried. Sitting in his office with 2 government oversight officers, Petro listened to Karimov's chilling voice as it played on loop. "You know you're lucky I picked you. You should be grateful." His skin crawled. Miss Ulia stood beside the table, arms folded. "This is more than misconduct," she said coldly. "This is criminal." Petrov rubbed his temples. "If this goes public, we're all finished." One of the oversight officers nodded solemnly. "We've been ordered to escalate the case to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. There's pressure from human rights organizations." Petrov scowled. He had hoped the issue could be quietly managed. But now, with outside agencies involved, the prison's dark corridors were under a spotlight. Meanwhile, in Cell 17, Amina tried to hold on to whatever sense of peace she could. Maria remained her closest ally. They communicated through tiny notes folded and passed beneath the wall. "You did the impossible," Maria wrote, "but you're not done yet. We need to protect others, too." Soon Amina found herself summoned, not by a warden or a guard, but by a government-appointed investigator, Agent Daria Nazirova, a quiet, observant woman from the National Committee for Women's Protection. Daria wore no uniform. Her approach was calm, almost motherly. They met in a private room in the infirmary. "Amina," Daria said softly, "I'm not here to interrogate you. I'm here to listen." Amina sat silently for several moments, then looked into Daria's eyes. "No one ever listened before," she said bitterly. "Why now?" "Because what happened to you is happening to others. You're not alone." Amina blinked back tears, and then she began to talk. She told Daria about her arrest, her false accusation, the way she was led into that dark interrogation room, Karimov's voice, his hands, the fear that gnawed at her night after night. "I stopped feeling human in here," she whispered. "I stopped believing justice existed." Daria placed a gentle hand on Amina's. "Justice doesn't happen on its own. It begins with people like you." Back in the general population, retaliation began to brew. Some guards loyal to Karimov grew cold and aggressive toward Amina. Her food was delivered late or rotten. Her privileges were quietly revoked. Whispers followed her in the halls. "You should have kept your mouth shut," one officer hissed. But Amina was no longer the same woman who had trembled in that dark cell weeks ago. She stood taller now, even when afraid. Maria kept close watch, and so did Miss Yulia, who now began secretly gathering testimonies from other inmates. And then something changed. Another prisoner came forward. Lilia, a soft-spoken woman incarcerated on drug charges. She'd once been treated strangely well, better food, easier duties. Everyone thought she had family in the system. But now she came forward shaken and teary-eyed, revealing that she too had been harassed by Sergeant Karimov for months. "I stayed silent because I thought I deserved it," she admitted to Daria. "But when I saw what Amina did, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Soon, 2 more testimonies arrived, women from different blocks. Similar stories. A pattern had emerged. A predator had been allowed to operate freely, and the system had enabled him. Faced with mounting evidence, the ministry had no choice but to act. A formal investigation was launched. Karimov was suspended from duty, pending trial. Internal affairs officers swept the prison for logs, surveillance tapes, and signs of procedural violations, but victory came with a price. Amina began receiving anonymous threats. Small folded notes slid beneath her door. "Watch your back, traitor. You'll regret this." And then one night, a rock was thrown through the window of the legal office representing her outside. Police were called, but no one was arrested. The message was clear. The system doesn't forgive easily. Maria sat beside her in the mess hall one morning, whispering between spoonfuls of porridge. "They want you scared. They want you to give up. But you've already changed more than you know." Amina smiled faintly. "It still feels like I'm in the dark." "You lit a candle, Amina," Maria said gently. "Now others are starting to see." That week, the national media caught wind of the story. An anonymous whistleblower from within the prison leaked a report. The headlines read, Sexual abuse in Kazan women's prison. Inmates break silence. Amina's name was not released, but her story was. Her voice, once silenced by steel doors and threats, had broken free, and it was just beginning to echo. Snow began falling softly outside the tall walls of Kazan, women's correctional facility. The frost that covered the prison's iron gates mirrored the chill that still lived deep in Amina Rustamova's bones. But something had changed. Inside the walls there was movement. Whispers had turned into conversations. Shame had turned into courage. Amina now walked the halls of the prison with quiet resolve. She still wore the same orange uniform. Her bed was still hard. Her nights were still restless. But her soul had begun to thaw. The ministry had officially suspended Sergeant Karamov, and his case had been escalated to the National Prosecutor's Office. He would stand trial for abuse of power, misconduct, and sexual coercion. But Amina knew better than to celebrate too soon. The system was slow, and often cruel. One afternoon she was called to the warden's office. But this time it wasn't Petrov, the man who once tried to bury her voice. He was gone. In his place sat Director Isef Aliv, a younger, reform-minded administrator brought in after pressure from national human rights groups. He wore a plain gray suit and glasses, no medals, no intimidation. "Amina Rustamova," he said kindly. "Please sit." Amina lowered herself onto the chair. Tense, but composed. "I've read your file and I've read the testimonies," Director Aliv said. "I want you to know that your courage has not gone unnoticed, and that changes, real changes, are coming to this facility." Amina gave a slight nod, still unsure whether to trust his words. "Also," he continued, sliding a document across the table, "your sentence has been reviewed. Due to your cooperation with the investigation and your good conduct, you are now eligible for early release under the Restorative Justice Program. You'll be a free woman within 2 weeks." Amina froze. "What?" "You're going home, Miss Rustamova." Her hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had fought so long, cried, in silence, written her truth on scraps of paper. But now, she was going home. Not just as an ex-inmate, but as someone who had stood up and changed the world around her. News of her release spread quickly among the inmates. That night, her entire cell block remained awake. Many didn't say anything. They just nodded softly, respectfully. Maria hugged her tightly. "You didn't just survive, Amina. You lit a fire." When the day of her release finally came, Amina stepped into the snow-covered yard. She wore her civilian coat, one size too small, handed back to her at discharge. Waiting for her was a woman in a thick headscarf, cheeks red from the cold. It was her mother, crying and smiling all at once. They embraced without words, just warmth, just years of pain melting away in a single trembling hug. But freedom was not easy. The outside world was loud, skeptical, fast. There were whispers from neighbors. There were stares in grocery stores. There were judgmental relatives who spoke her name like a stain. Still, Amina stood tall. She began writing, first in a notebook, then in a blog. Eventually, her words were picked up by women's rights groups, legal advocacy organizations, and social justice journalists. She began speaking publicly, sharing her story at universities and human rights seminars. One of her speeches went viral. "I was silenced. I was shamed. I was nearly broken. But I refused to disappear. I speak not just for myself, but for every woman who was told her pain didn't matter because she wore a prison uniform." Requests for interviews poured in. Amina refused the glamour. She focused on impact. Alongside Maria, who was released shortly after, she co-founded a small nonprofit, Voices behind the walls, dedicated to helping formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society and access mental health and legal services. But not everyone welcomed her success. Late one night, as Amina worked alone in the office, her phone rang, an unknown number. A male voice said coldly, "You're playing with fire. Stop talking or we'll stop you." Click. Amina stared at the phone. She had heard those threats before, inside the prison in the darkness. But she was no longer afraid. The very next morning she held a press conference in front of the Ministry of Justice building. Her words were strong, unwavering. "You can silence one voice, but you can't silence the truth. I'm not afraid because I know now I was never alone. There are thousands of Aminas still behind bars, and I won't stop until they're heard too." Weeks later, the trial of Sergeant Karimov began. Amina testified, standing across from the man who once tried to steal her dignity. This time, the courtroom listened. His sentence, 14 years in prison, dishonorably discharged. As she walked out of court, surrounded by flashing cameras, a reporter asked, "Is this justice?" Amina paused. "Justice would have protected me before it hurt me, but this is a start." She turned and walked away, not with fear, but with purpose. And so, in a snowy corner of Russia, a Muslim woman named Amina Rustamova, once silenced, once caged, became something far greater than a survivor. She became a voice for the voiceless, a spark in the dark, a reminder that even behind the coldest bars, truth has a way of breaking through. So friends, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Today, we saw how one woman's courage shook the walls of a broken system. If you want to hear more true, powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your attention, your voice, and your heart can make a difference in someone else's life. Allah Hafez.